Mr. Yuan Zibing, who's our third speaker, will speak in Chinese. So therefore, there are translation sets available on your tables in case you don't understand Chinese. I now request the chair, Shri Raji Maharishi, to please take over the session.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session titled Terrorism in South Asia. Let me first of all welcome to the dais as speakers Mr. Kaju, former ambassador to Pakistan, Mr. Keisling from Germany, Mr. Yuan Zibing from China, and whenever Mr. Steve Cole joins us on the Skype, let me also welcome him. So I have a few sort of introductory remarks to make in this session and on the issue of terrorism in South Asia, and I'll try to be short and not take too much time because there are distinguished speakers who know more about the subject than I do, who will throw more light on the subject. Well, one thing that strikes us about South Asia is that the rate of terrorism here, the incidents of terrorism, are perhaps amongst the highest in the world, next only to currently to Syria and Iraq. And that is, of course, a cause of worry. It's a deep cause of worry. It's something that we should think about, and therefore the topic today is very relevant and very topical, so to speak. We can discuss an issue which is at the center of the future of this region of the world. Whether you take Pakistan or India or Afghanistan, counting Afghanistan as South Asia, the incidence of terrorism across these three countries kind of show a trend which is highly disconcerting and which is disturbing the very lives that we set out to achieve for ourselves. Bangladesh also, though it's not talked about much and it's sort of underplayed in these areas, in the area of terrorism, is also sitting on a bit of a powder keg, and we have seen recently incidents in Bangladesh which are equally horrifying. So South Asia is, in some senses, a big center of terrorism that we are discussing today. And there are 3-4 issues that I would like to sort of bring to the attention of the august audience here. The first issue is the issue of the state not being a responsible player. This is what, in an ideal situation, the states must be responsible players who would not allow cross-border terrorism, would not give shelter to individuals or organizations who sponsor terrorism within the country and across borders. Unfortunately, we have a situation where one state in particular has not been, one state in South Asia, has not been a very responsible state in that sense, and therefore we see a lot of terrorism that emanates from this country as almost routine, as almost part of its politics, its geopolitics, in international relations. So in the past, in the 20th century, it was war which was seen often as a continuation of politics, and now we have a situation in South Asia where obviously some state players see terrorism as an instrument of policy or politics. That itself is a bit of a worry that needs to be taken account of. The second point is that, of course, in this war, there are no winners. So there has been no winner ever. Whether you look at the terrorism that started in, that I can recall as a child from France, in France, whether it was the terror of the late 60s, which was, a little horrifying for a child of my age at that time. There are no winners in this war. No terrorist group has ever really achieved a political aim. What they've achieved is a loser on both ends, and obviously the recipient of terror, the focus of terror, has all kinds of disturbances that take place. Your economic growth is affected. The very fabric of society gets affected. There are emotional costs that are unaccounted for. There are economic costs that can be accounted for, perhaps, but not in terms of growth, only in terms of loss. There is a heightened of insecurity among citizens. There is, unfortunately, it also makes us repeated terrors of incidents of terror also inure us from the horror of terror, and we start living with it as part of our lives. So there's a decline in the sensitivity towards these incidents, with the result that an incident which, like the one that recently happened in Madhya Pradesh, doesn't draw as many eyeballs unless there's an incident of the magnitude of Bombay or the attack in a school in Pakistan. It doesn't draw the kind of attention that each incident of terror should really be attracting. So it reduces sensitivity, it makes us inure to the horrors of terrorism and the cost that it imposes on society as a whole, on, of course, individuals, and on society as a whole. And yet, as I said, there are no winners in this war. So it is an issue of concern as to how we'll handle a situation which has been created, which leaves no winners at all, only losers, and losers on both sides. One obvious answer is that we need to work together to disrupt financing of terror. And the world has encouragingly taken steps to do this. There are attempts through FATF, etc., to disrupt financing of terror. Whether that is sufficient is difficult to say, but obviously efforts have been made, and I think over time these systems might be able to disrupt terror financing to quite some extent. The other is the issue of minimizing the effect of any radicalization on religious grounds. That's a more tough battle to fight because it's a battle of minds, a battle of hearts. But that is something that we also need to worry about as countries, as states, and as societies, how we are going to stop and interfere with radicalization of our young, who are being misled by a very sort of seductive propaganda, which perhaps the consequence of which they perhaps fully don't understand. That is a challenge, I think, which we are not yet coping with very well, but we'll have to evolve capacities to meet that challenge also. The third one that I wish to make is about state capacity. So obviously the state capacity to meet the challenge has to increase and has to be of high order. Terrorists would love to attack, and of course it would draw many more eyeballs if they were to carry out that incidents of terror in the USA or UK. That would be their prime target if they could. But naturally, the reason that the number of incidents in these countries are less is perhaps because of their better state capacities. Unfortunately, in this part of the world, state capacity is still not to the extent that the developed countries have achieved, whether it is in terms of the nimbleness of our intelligence agencies or the coordination capacity amongst various institutions, various organizations that need to look at these problems, whether it's technology or whether even it is commitment. As I said earlier, that we tend to become a little insensitive to the kind of horror that terror is bringing, and therefore perhaps even that commitment of the people involved in fighting this menace is not as much. We have a system which is largely still a system that we inherited. It's a 19th century system which we inherited from the British, And across South Asia, across the country South Asia, that system more or less persists. I am also a symbol of that system, and that naturally, as one sees the world changing and the new threats that are emerging, is something that we all need to look at as to how we are going to change our systems to improve our state capacity. So, and state capacity doesn't really mean only the government. It also means how good our criminal administration system is and our criminal justice system is. And in that also, these countries, I think, are not acquitting themselves very well. As a matter of fact, our criminal justice system sometimes seems to be even more antiquated than our administrative systems. And perhaps if somebody were to study it, one would see that the change or the improvement in the criminal justice system has been slower in coming, almost negligible, and that itself is a cause of worry and contributes to encouraging acts of terror. The fourth point I wish to make is about the damage it does to the lives that we try to choose for ourselves, and essentially, in political terms, the democratic way of life. So, we are actually, the attacks of terror are actually endangering the very values that we wanted to adopt and live by. For example, we perhaps have greater tolerance for non-judicial settlement of some of these issues. That is not a good sign for us. We have to ensure that we live by the values that that democracy wants us to live by, that democracy means that we live by. And unfortunately, as our state capacity weakens, as we are unable to deal with it systematically in terms of administrative capacity or the criminal justice system, we perhaps become more tolerant of extra constitutional means of settling some of these issues, which, as I said, is digging the very foundations of the democratic system that we set for ourselves. So if you take the example of the failure of state capacity and the kind of damage that it does to our system, then of course Bombay is the prime example. And there is a lot written about Bombay which is not very widely read, but some of the insightful articles or items that came out of Bombay, some of which actually point out where and how the failures took place. So whether it was Pratap Bhanu Mehta's insightful article in the Indian Express, or Robert Kagan's item in Washington Post, which speaks about the strategic motivations for the Bombay attack and actually what it implied in terms of India and Pakistan, and how it almost brought about a situation where it left dilemmas both for Pakistan, for three countries actually, for Pakistan, for India, and even for the USA. So it is another example, another insightful article on failure of state capacity was Edward Lutwerk's The Fatal Delay, which some of you might have come across, and of course the issue of having a relook at our systems and the way we that deal with our issues of governance. Ajay Shah's Look Deeper, perhaps again Indian Express or Business Standard, I can't remember, one of the two that came out with. So there's a host of literature. There's a book that if Steve Call is on now on Skype, then his book called Ghost Wars, which unfortunately I haven't read, which is widely acclaimed, and I owe Steve an apology for that. But these are the kind of things that will give you insight on how terrorism, while leaving no winners, creates dangers for our system, our democratic polity, which we have to be very aware of. It also tells us, the literature around this subject also tells us that we really need to look at our systems and our state capacity anew. We have to revive our systems. We have to change the way that we work. If terrorism is to be stopped, then it's not NSG which is going to stop it. If it's to be fought in that sense, protection begins actually at the beat constable. And we saw in Bombay that the beat constable, the local police, was completely helpless in even cordoning off the sites of attack. Another aspect of the lack of capacity in, and I talk of India now, is that we actually have lost focus on some of the major issues of governance. Two things that come to my mind is education and health, where I think the Indian state has not delivered the kind of services that were needed to be delivered to its people, which are core governance issues. But even more important in education and health is, of course, the issue of law and order. If we can't provide security to our citizens, peace of mind, a congenial atmosphere of for economic activity, then really we are failing. But unfortunately, over the last half a century or so, the focus of governance has shifted from its core duties of law and order, health, education, to announcing populist schemes which are aimed at, benefiting certain sort of pockets of population or certain parts of the population, which is, of course, also referred to often as, it's something that is aimed at the issue of re-election rather than governance. So Indian socialism has done this strange sort of perversion in our system, where we have, in the name of the poor, announced schemes and yet allowed certain fundamentals like education, health, and law and order, more important law and order, to really be of less than the best quality. And of course, ironically speaking, this hurts the poor the most. The absence of a peaceful environment, absence of good education or health is actually the poor which gets hurt most. And yet, we are actually getting diverted from these core issues of governance by focusing more on what we imagine are pro-poor schemes. Now, to conclude, what is, in my opinion, and of course this is totally personal opinion, these are all personal opinions, what in my personal opinion is the answer? Well, I think, coming back, whenever I look at a problem in India, I find that we have only one answer that we have to find, and that answer is that we have to have a proper, we have to have continued and proper economic growth, double-digit growth or near about that, for a sustained period of time, so that on the one hand, we can improve our state capacities, our capacities to take on these challenges, and on the other hand, we reduce the frustrations of unemployment, lack of economic opportunity, etc. for the youth, thus reducing the pool of people from which terrorists can be hired or procured, or a pool for people who can be radicalized. So these are the few opening remarks, few thoughts that I had on the issue of terrorism in South Asia and how it affects all our citizens. And I would like to repeat that, as usual, the adverse impact of any lack of governance or safety is the maximum impact actually is on the poorest. With these remarks, I would pass on to the more knowledgeable speakers. Would you like to speak first? Yeah, okay. So we'll pass on to Mr. Vivek Kaju, who will apprise us of his views.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Maharishi, my colleagues on the panel, ladies and gentlemen. I've been roped in at the last moment, so you'll have to forgive me if my remarks are somewhat jerky. Terrorism, for me, is the pursuit of war. It is not only a law and order problem, it is not only a problem of governance. Those are important. But terrorism is the pursuit of war, not through conventional means, but through the fostering of violence with the objective of creating terror and therefore weakening the psychological resolve of the enemy. On this, we should have no doubt. and therefore the confusion that is sometimes created in equating terrorism or seeking the remedies of terrorism through better law and order, through better governance, I think is only partial. These remedies will never address the problem fully. And in the South Asian context, it is the most important aspect of terrorism is its use as an act of war and continuous war waged by Pakistan against India and in a sense against Afghanistan. That is the basic issue that we are confronted with, at least India and Afghanistan are confronted with when we look at terrorism in South Asia. There was a time, some decades ago, when in its pursuit of terrorism, Pakistan followed a doctrine of deniability. And I remember official discussions in which I participated with Pakistan when this issue was raised, when there was a mention of the Pakistani tanzeems, and when the Pakistani interlocutors were confronted with records from the Pakistan media itself about these tanzeems, Indian officials and Indian diplomats were met with a complete wall of deniability. In fact, it was said that that there is no such tanzeem at all. From this, I think after 9/11, the Pakistanis started stating that while these tanzeems were there, and while in the 1990s Pakistan did pursue the use of proxy war to achieve its objectives in Jammu and Kashmir, it has thereafter given up that pursuit. So, this was a very convenient argument that it was partial deniability, that there is no longer the use of terror or proxy war, but that there used to be this. From here now, I find that the Pakistanis have started saying that yes, there are these tanzeems that are externally focused, these are non-state actors, and that since the capacities and the abilities of the Pakistan state are somewhat limited, therefore, Pakistan has to pursue a sequential policy, which means that they have to first tackle those groups that are against Pakistan itself, and thereafter they'll come to groups that are oriented against India. Now, all this we know is a lot of hogwash. Recently, there has been the arrest of Hafiz Saeed, and I think a new person has been appointed as head or interim head of the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, that this too needs to be examined fully, because I doubt whether it has meant anything, any change on the ground. All this leads to the firm conclusion in my mind that the Pakistan state is wedded to the use of terror, and that the use of terror is an essential ingredient in Pakistan's security doctrine against India. Now, there is a proposition that I wish to place before this House, and that proposition is this, that the Pakistanis say that since India and Pakistan both have nuclear weapons, therefore a response to Pakistan's cross-border terrorism will be escalatory and hence dangerous. Now, the fact is that in a sense Pakistan has turned the way nuclear states conducted business with each other on its head. This requires a measure of clarification. By this I mean that during the Cold War, when the United States and its allies were engaged in contestation and confrontation with the Soviet Union, there was a lot of proxy activity. But these wars, proxy wars, were never fought on each other's territory. There was no incident of terror, as far as I know, which the United States engaged on the territory of the Soviet Union, or the Soviet Union engaged on the American mainland. If there were proxy wars, and there were many, they were contested in Africa, in Asia, or in South America. The Pakistanis, by engaging in terror on Indian territory, have changed this doctrine on its head, and not only India, but the international community has not been able to come up with any answer to this. And this is something which I think all strategic thinkers need to look at very closely, because it is an extremely dangerous thing. The next point that I wish to make is that the Indian response for the last at least 2 decades, as far as I can analyze, has been to engage in political management and largely domestic political management whenever it has been confronted with an act of Pakistani terror. It is no longer conceived to be a strategic challenge. And that is why I think that we have not engaged all our national resources in confronting Pakistani terror. There have been incidents. After each incident, there is a great deal of unhappiness in the country. The press and the media clamors. The political parties come into fray. Public opinion is roused and there is great anger. After some time, anger subsides, and the same processes begin with Pakistan, the processes of engagement till the next terrorist attack. If you study the history of India-Pakistan relations over the last 2 decades, you will find this happening repeatedly. Which brings me to the third point, and which is my final point, which is this, that as Marx said, philosophers have sought to interpret the world, what matters is how to change it. In this case, all of us have sought to interpret terror and analyze terrorist attacks, but we simply have not succeeded in finding an answer to terror and to cross-border terror. I do think that the time has come when India and countries like Afghanistan must use all their resources to come up with an answer to Pakistani terror, and that can only happen if in India we give up the idea that engagement with Pakistan is the route to get out of Pakistan's terror. To my mind, that is a policy of appeasement and pandering to the Pakistanis. After all, international law does not sanction the use of terror. And somehow or the other, the feeling has arisen that unless we are able to engage Pakistan and engage it diplomatically and politically, we will not find a solution. The point is that ab initio, a state should not use terror. And if a state uses terror, then that state needs to be dealt with not only by its neighbors who are facing the consequences of terror, but by the international community itself. The sad fact is that whatever we may talk of international cooperation on terror, and there has been a substantial degree of this cooperation, including intelligence sharing, at the end of the day, all countries have to face it individually. And hence, my plea to Indian strategic thinkers and to the Indian political class is that Pakistani terror is a strategic challenge and that India must face it strategically by using all its national resources, and there are avenues and there are methods to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaju. Mr. Henry Geisling from Germany, may I request you to say your remarks,
please. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In my presentation today, I will focus on an aspect of Chinese-Pakistan cooperation, and as it is also concerning security within the Indian Ocean, I will talk a little bit on China's so-called string of pearls policy, and the aspect of terrorism will be included in this presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, during my years in Islamabad in the 1990s, I had the opportunity to accompany the former Pakistani army chief, General Mirza Aslam Bek, on 3 different trips to China. The Chinese don't forget old friends, and invited Bek also after his active service. One point which surprised me during these trips was that one could find in the libraries of think tanks and universities visited by us a 230-page study titled The Eurasian Land Bridge, a New Silk Road as Motor for Economic Development. This 230-page study was, to my big surprise, published in Germany in 1996 by a small German political activist group based in Wiesbaden near Frankfurt. Head of this group was, and the elder ones amongst you might probably still know his name, Lyndon LaRouche, a US citizen and political activist who was living in Germany and married to a German political activist by the name of Helga Sepp LaRouche. According to the monthly magazine of this group, this couple had visited China quite often and was received by high-ranking Chinese officials. Why do I mention this group? I don't know whether they still exist. This now 17 years old New Silk Road study from Wiesbaden, and it was of this format, came into my mind again when China's development plans became unfiled in autumn 2013, subdivided in Silk Road Economic Belt and 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, both today known as One Belt, One Road strategy. It proved, at least to me, that China's geostrategists had worked for years over a strategy which China's paramount leader Xi Jinping and his Premier Minister Li Keqiang are now promoting during their state visits in Asia and in Europe. During his visit to Pakistan in April 2015, President Xi Jinping signed agreements with Pakistan over development projects worth $46 billion, a spending which is focusing on building a 3,000-kilometer or 1,800 miles China-Pakistan economic corridor. This corridor will connect Pakistan's deep sea port Gwadar, located at the Arabian Sea, through China's western Xinjiang region. International analysts see this China-Pakistan economic corridor as President Jinping's biggest gambit in the One Belt, One Road strategy. Since signing these agreements in April 2015, the vast majority of Pakistan's politicians, economics and strategists believe that CPEC and in particular the development of Gwadar will bring Pakistan wealth, prosperity, regional importance and recognition. But it speaks for good political reporting in Pakistan that also in 2015 some writers pointed towards soft points within the whole corridor project. For example, in September 2015, the paper The Express Tribune published an opinion from a Pakistani analyst under the headline, Gwadar String of Perils. In this article, the writer said, and now I quote, "What we should be considering through is that while China has built some roads in Pakistan, it still needs to lay thousands of kilometers of gas and oil pipelines and railway tracks in order to put Gwadar into use. That will cost money, and China may be reluctant to invest if the region continues to be volatile. Furthermore, Pakistan faces a law-called insurgency in Balochistan, where Gwadar is located and through which the proposed pipelines will pass." Unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, in my mind, it speaks for the quality of this writing when the guilt for the situation in the province of Balochistan is not seen coming only from outside Pakistan. Alvi Sattar, the writer, writes again, quote, "Several tribal chiefs are opposing a large-scale foreign investment, fearing it will bring an influx of outsiders. They demand greater autonomy and royalties for the extraction of natural resources. Although China has developed local infrastructure, it is considered as an exploiter by some segments of the local population." Unquote. Pakistan security strategists see the situation, of course, in a different way. In a paper given to me in August 2015 by the ISI, they say, and I quote again, "Due to economic potentials, Balochistan has become a venue of geopolitics and battlefield of economic interests between global and regional power players. Balochistan was becoming prone to terrorism and sectarian violence. However, these tendencies have been sufficiently contained. An analysis of summary of terrorism incidents occurred in Balochistan, resulting in the killings of 2,407 civilian security forces and 5,229 injured. However, owing to effecting countermeasures and restricting the role of dubious international NGOs, the situation is improving." Unquote. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, this ISI paper points especially also to the research and analysis wing of India. For example, like this, and I quote last time, "RAW in collusion with other agencies, especially Afghan National Directorate of Security, is fomenting instability in Pakistan by providing financial support, training, weapons and explosives, and sanctuaries on foreign soil. Indian embassies and consulates in Afghanistan are directly involved in funding, coordinating and supporting Balochistan sub-nationalists, miscreants, and Tehrik Taliban Pakistan." Unquote. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have no difficulties to quote from this ISI paper in my presentation here in New Delhi, because it is widely known that the ISI works similar in Kashmir. It is simply the name of the game. And in my book about the ISI published in 2016, I have used clear words also about what happened in Mumbai in 2008. And I quote myself, "An operation such as the Mumbai attacks, which needed expert technical assessment, money and time to prepare, could not have been carried out or kept hidden without the knowledge of the service's leadership. Considering the political explosiveness of the event, the course as well would have been informed." Unquote. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have in mind to go to Pakistan again next month. It is also clearly that Lashkar-e-Taiba use of maritime approach on its way to Mumbai in 2008 was already a terrorist act of the same quality like the attacks on USS Cole in 2000 and the French tanker Limburg in 2002. A precondition for a way out of this situation, in my mind, will only be in sight if Islamabad and Rawalpindi are putting their present Kashmir policy for a longer time on ice. China's leadership has recommended this way to Pakistan more than 20 years ago, and it might do so again. At least that's what I hope. If Pakistan will follow such an advice, terrorism in South Asia and parts of the Indian Ocean might drop significantly. Now back to Gwadar and the question whether at the end of the Chinese-Pakistan economic corridor, Port Gwadar will be a success, question mark. As said before, most Pakistanis are heavily optimistic about it. Pessimism one could find only in some articles, for example, in the article of strategic interest in Pakistan ports at Gwadar, and also in Gwadar's string of perils, and lately in February by James Dorsey, who wrote the article ASEAN Ports, Pitfalls of China's One Belt, One Road initiative, in which he claimed that the China-Pakistan economic corridor might not be successful at the end. I don't agree with him. I think China's paramount leader, Xi Jinping, will not end his approximately 10 years term around 2023 with a failure of the corridor project. Far too much money and prestige are already invested. And Beijing's development policy in Western China, even if China's economic growth rate might be lower in future, demands access to the Indian Ocean. China is investing around 51 billion in Pakistan infrastructure and energy, including Port Gwadar. Beijing has also deployed 15,000 soldiers to protect Chinese workers in Pakistan. And Pakistan itself has built up a 17,000-man special force to protect its own interest in the China-Pakistan economic corridor. It is therefore all set to keep the so-called low-scale insurgency in Balochistan under control. And if that is the case, thinking about the shortest link from Gwadar to Central Asia via Afghanistan might be realistic again. Pakistan's political and military leadership have started a new initiative to come to an understanding with Kabul and with major groups of the Afghan Taliban. Whether it will be successful in the near future remains to be seen, as ISIL, or Daesh as it is called here, at latest incidents have proved, has also now a foothold in Afghanistan. And something else came to my mind yesterday. The Honorable Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan was here, and in his presentation he pointed out there are no good terrorists, there are no bad terrorists, there are only terrorists. But one could read just recently that the government in Kabul has called back Hek Madhya, has hacked him, and he is now a part of the business again. Now, if he doesn't was a terrorist, I don't understand the world anymore. Now, the deputy minister might have pointed to real politics, but if real politics matters so much, then of course the old sentence that my enemy's enemy is my friend is still existing, and that was refused in a few presentations yesterday. The Pakistani side will give their utmost to fulfill all financial burdens of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. The total commitment amount are 50 billion and is divided into two broad categories: 35 billion allocated for energy projects and 15 billion for infrastructure. Whether Pakistan will be able to bring up such money, it's debatable. I have my doubts again. Back to the One Belt, One Road and other possibility pitfalls, there is at present a fragile political situation in Sri Lanka, where China has developed Port Hambantota. It is seen by analysts as another question mark whether Chinese ring of birds within that. They point towards Sri Lanka's former president, who has warned China in December 2016 that public protest would erupt if plans proceeded to build in Hambantota a 6,000-hectare economic zone that will buffet a 1.5 billion deep seaport, a 209 million international airport, and a world-class cricket stadium, a convention center, and new roads. But if political turmoils in Sri Lanka might keep Chinese investors being more careful in spending over there, Beijing still has more options in its string of pearls scenario. There are the container ports facilities built by China in Chittagong, Bangladesh, and roads, dams, and pipelines built in Myanmar. A group of Chinese investors, Chinese Group Corporation, has won 2 contracts related to a special economic zone in Western Myanmar, and so forth. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, each story has 2 sides. Over the last 3 years, there were also disputes between both Beijing and Rangoon for different reasons, most about royalties, prices, and compensations. These problems are not solved yet, and contracts might have to be renegotiated. International political observers see Myanmar again as a failure in China's string of pearls. In my mind, this is unlikely. Both sides will come to an understanding. China needs the short links to southern China via Myanmar, and the Burmese government the investment and the money from the big neighbor. There's at the end the question whether China plans to use Gwadar for a naval purpose. The Pakistani Ali Sadr wrote in September 2015, despite over a decade having passed since China started constructing the first phase of Gwadar, no military-related activity has ever been observed there. Its current interest appears to be commercial, aiming at securing an alternative route for its energy supply, unquote. Indeed, as far as the naval interests are concerned, China concentrated so far on the South China Sea. But that might change. Analysts are predicting that after a decade, China might have more warships than in the USA. I think in November 2016, there were Pakistani media full with reports about an Indian submarine trying to enter Pakistani territorial waters, aiming to reach Port Gwadar for spying. According to a spokesman of Pakistan Navy, the submarine was detected through aerial surveillance, was continuously tracked by Navy fleet units and pushed out of Pakistani waters. A spokesman of Indian Navy, of course, denied that it all has ever occurred. But interestingly, the whole story came up just a couple of days before Pakistan and China started naval exercise in the Arabian Sea. As a reaction to the whole incident, China handed over 2 Navy ships to Pakistan in January this year for joint security along the sea route of the China-Pakistan economic belt. China also promised to deliver 2 more state-of-the-art ships to Pakistan in the future. Iran, which was watching the whole situation over the last years, for example, seems to have taken all this into account already. And in February 2013, it was already announced that a new naval base would be built in Pasarbanda, Makran, near Iran's border to Pakistan. Iran's navy began to intensify its efforts to develop the Makran coast, stretching from Bandar Abbas to Pasarbanda. I think that the Iranians expect Chinese naval ships in the near future also in Guadalajara, and I think they are right. Thank you.
So I, in the meanwhile, have a message from the organizers that they would like to hand over the session to a more able chairman, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sena. May I request him to come? But actually, the reason is that unfortunately I'll have to leave shortly because of some commitments because the Parliament is in session. So may I request Mr. Shekhar Sena, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sena, to come to the dais. In the meanwhile, may I request Mr. Yuan Zibin from China to share his thoughts with us.
Yes, so before you leave, we'll just request Admiral Shekhar Sena to please give you a memento, a token of our appreciation. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time from your busy schedule.
尊敬的主席先生、女士们、先生们、朋友们，大家中午好。感谢印度基金会举办这次国际反恐研讨会。我们都知道，恐怖主义是人类文明世界面临的最严峻、最急迫的安全挑战。印度基金会已经连续3年举办国际反恐研讨会，邀请各国政要、专家和学者共聚一堂，商讨恐怖主义这一全球性的课题。这次会议对我们凝聚共识、强化合作、共同维护地区安全具有非常重要的意义。我很荣幸受邀参加会议并发言。从911事件到今天，国际反恐斗争又持续了16个年头。为了打击恐怖主义，世界各国做出了巨大的努力，付出了高昂的代价，也取得了重大的进展。但是从全球范围看，恐怖主义威胁依然严重，恐怖活动依然猖獗，反恐斗争形势依然严峻。过去的1年，尼日利亚、比利时、美国、土耳其、孟加拉国、法国、德国、埃及、印度都相继发生了严重的恐怖袭击事件，造成重大人员伤亡。恐怖分子的猖狂进攻一次又一次冲击了人类伦理道德的底线。这表明恐怖威胁仍然是悬在我们每一个人头上的达摩克利斯之剑。没有一个国家可以置身于恐怖之外的安全岛。反对恐怖主义仍然是国际社会长期面临的严峻课题。目前，恐怖活动已经进入了全球扩张的新阶段，呈现出复杂化、多样化的新态势。一是恐怖分子本土化，伊斯兰国、基地等国际恐怖组织被打散，作战分子向各国回流渗透，发动全球袭击的可能性不断上升。受极端思想影响，一些地区原本可控的宗教、民族矛盾被迅速激化，内生性恐怖分子明显增多。 第二个特点是袭击形态独狼化，独自策划和发动恐怖袭击的个体恐怖分子越来越多，防范和追踪的难度更大，引起社会的极大不安。三是恐袭手段简易化，除了劫机、自杀式爆炸等传统恐袭手段，恐怖分子用一把刀、一杆枪、一辆车，甚至一个改装的高压锅就可以实施恐怖袭击，造价低，一操作防不胜防。四是恐怖宣传网络化，国际恐怖组织利用互联网和新媒体大肆宣扬宗教极端思想。伊斯兰国每天在全球各大社交网站发布的暴恐视频和文字图片有9万多条，大量潜在的极端分子随时可能受到蛊惑，成为独狼，加入圣战。国际社会正逐渐陷入人人自危的境地，越来越多的国家承受着巨大的反恐压力。南亚和印度洋地区是国际反恐主战场之一，历史因素、地缘政治因素和宗教、民族冲突长期影响南亚地区的和平与稳定，为恐怖主义滋生提供了土壤。近年来，随着全球民粹主义思潮上升，宗教文明冲突日益加剧，南亚的反恐形势不容乐观。伊斯兰国等国际恐怖组织加大向这一地区渗透，大肆招募人员，开展恐怖融资，企图开辟第二战场。阿富汗和平进程进展缓慢，阿富汗塔利班整体实力虽有所削弱，但仍然是不断地试图用武力彰显存在，频频发动针对本国政府和外国人的恐怖袭击。印度、巴基斯坦、孟加拉国连遭重大恐怖袭击，反恐的压力有增无减。女士们、先生们、朋友们，恐怖主义是人类文明的毒瘤，是全人类的公敌。面对恐怖主义威胁，任何一个国家都不可能独善其身，我们必须携起手来，进行真诚的、切实的国际合作，组建反恐的统一战线，共同应对恐怖主义威胁。中国历来主张反对一切形式的恐怖主义，坚决打击残害无辜生命的暴力恐怖活动，积极致力于国际反恐合作，维护世界和平与安宁。我们认为，恐怖主义背后有各种复杂因素的交织，它的根源是经济社会发展的不平衡。近年来，一些国家主导的国际反恐实践也证明，单纯依靠武力或者以暴易暴不能遏制恐怖主义，经常适得其反。只有坚持标本兼治、综合施策，促进宗教和族群和谐共处、共同发展，才能真正铲除恐怖主义滋生的土壤，避免陷入越反越恐的怪圈。恐怖主义没有好坏之分，绝不是特定国家、民族和宗教的标签。有些国家用反恐为借口，加剧民族矛盾、宗教对立和人民之间的隔阂，反而会促进极端狂热思想的泛滥。反恐不能用双重标准，不能用反恐为名行单边主义、干涉主义之实。把反恐斗争变成大国战略的工具，或许能赢得1、2场战役，但无助于打赢反恐这场战争，最后只会损害 自身的战略利益。国际反恐合作应当坚持联合国的主导作用，在联合国宪章和国际法的框架内行动。各国都应该严格执行安理会反恐决议，坚决切断涉恐人员资金流动，打击网络恐怖主义，遏制极端思想传播。女士们、先生们、朋友们，中国也是恐怖主义的受害者。2009年，中国新疆发生的7.5打砸抢烧事件，造成197人死亡，1000多人受伤。从那以后，以东伊运为代表的东突恐怖势力不断在新疆各地发动恐怖袭击，冲击政府机关，打杀无辜群众。恐怖分子还在云南省的昆明市的火车站实施恐怖袭击，造成社会极大恐慌。2016年，中国驻吉尔吉斯斯坦大使馆遭遇汽车炸弹袭击，在海外的中国公民也频频受到当地恐怖活动波及。随着中国深度参与经济全球化的进程，越来越多的中国公民和中资企业走向世界，其面临的安全风险也不断上升，对中国政府海外安全保障能力提出了新的考验。同南亚各国开展反恐合作，维护南亚和印度洋地区的和平与稳定，对确保中国国家安全也具有特殊重要的意义。一直以来，中国积极致力于国际反恐合作。到现在为止，我们已经和南亚多个国家建立了反恐合作机制，开展了实质性的合作。中国和印度、阿富汗、巴基斯坦、尼泊尔等国都开展了年度的陆军反恐联合训练，交流反恐经验做法，提高联合反恐作战能力。中国在阿富汗和平与和解问题上在发挥着建设性的作用，积极推动所有阿富汗武装反对派参与同政府的和解进程，以结束暴力，实现国家持久和平。中国还通过“一带一路”大项目合作，在南亚地区开展民生项目援助，增进南亚人民的福祉，以期从根本上铲除极端思想和恐怖主义滋生的土壤。中国和印度是世界上人口第一和第二大国，两个人口大国加强反恐交流合作，对全球反恐斗争必不可少，也符合两国人民的根本利益。2016年9月，首届中印反恐安全对话在北京举行，这是两国目前建立的最高级别的反恐合作机制，对进一步增进彼此了解、加强反恐合作、共同应对安全威胁具有重要意义。目前，中国和印度已经有反恐安全对话和陆军反恐联合训练两个合作机制。今后要发挥好两个机制的作用，把反恐合作落实在行动中，有力维护两国及地区安全稳定。我们还建议要加强中国和印度反恐情报交流合作，建立恐怖威胁预警机制，相互提供涉恐情报和线索，协助缉拿和遣返涉恐的嫌疑人。两国执法和情报官员可以加强交流，相互借鉴反恐经验，推动建立更高级别的长效反恐合作机制，定期交换意见。中国愿意学习印度在网络反恐方面的先进技术，也愿意分享中国本身在维稳防乱、促进民族和谐的做法和经验。女士们、先生们、朋友们，暴力恐怖主义活动让鲜活的生命骤然消逝，让无辜的人民承受痛苦，这是对人类文明 共同伦理价值的公然挑衅。反恐关系到所有国家的安全与稳定。各国在反恐合作上有共同利益，也有共同决心。我们一定要将决心变成我们共同的行动，结成反恐统一战线，共同捍卫我们和平安宁的美好家园。谢谢大家。Thanks all.
I think we have not been able to establish contact with Stephen Cole, and therefore will bring to end as far as the talks are concerned. But before I open the house for questions and answers, you must remember that I am only standing in for Rajiv Maharshi, who has left this place for some other engagement. I just want to make 2-3 comments because there is not much has been spoken about the state sponsoring of the terror outfits in South Asia, particularly during this session, and I thought that it will probably come up, though Ambassador Vivek Kaju did mention as to how the state is involved. When the Peshawar school was attacked by the terrorists some time ago, the Federal Investigation Agency of Pakistan carried out investigation, and the head of the investigation is a gentleman from Pakistan Police Service, Mr. Tariq Khosa. Tariq Khosa, in his report, he mentioned that he came to a conclusion that the no terror group in Pakistan, these are his words, and I quote him, that the no terror group in Pakistan can survive and flourish without the support of the state. This is his statement. Or externally helped by means of finances. I happened to meet him in Muscat some time back in the month of, I think it was October or November. And he repeated this statement in that conference, and he said that he is very confident and he has got enough investigative material to prove this. So that points at the direction of where is the fountainhead, how it is being financed, because none of these terror agencies actually can work unless you have the financing. While it is true that it is not a law and order issue, but there can be methods by which we can reduce the indulgence of younger people in the catchment areas by using those developmental projects. And that is where I go by what the Home Secretary of India mentioned, that development is, but it is just one issue, one of the ways of tackling the future trajectory of the indulgence of younger people into terrorist attack. Our Chinese speaker, he spoke about in great deal about the terrorism and the effect of terror in China. It is true that the Xinjiang province is very prone to terror attacks. But what I want to mention to him that the Uyghurs or the terror groups which are based in parts of Uzbekistan, the training of these, it's on record that the Lashkar-e-Taiba militants are actually training the Uyghur militants and sending them into Xinjiang. So it may be a good idea to keep that in mind, that you are sitting very close to the home of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. And he also mentioned about the united fight and the United Nations Security Council resolutions should be sort of implemented by all countries. But I wish there was some mention about, using the Security Council resolution for naming some of the known terrorists and the terrorist organizations, which has not been done, and we know that China has put a technical hold. So there is a good scope for really larger cooperation. The fact that the Chinese scholars are now talking about terrorism in South Asia, it very much means that they have accepted that the South Asian fountainhead of terrorism is beginning to impact China as well, which is not really South Asia, but they have their interest in South Asia. So with those few sort of comments on the 2-3 talks that we had, I'll leave the house open to questions. Please identify and ask your questions. Please name the panelist who you would like to answer the question. Yes, sir. Prakash, sir. Please give a mic.
Prakash Singh is my name. I am a retired Director General of India's Border Security Force. My question is addressed to the Chinese delegate. Sir, we have great respect for China's civilizational values. We have great respect for China's cultural heritage. And yet, we are disappointed, or I would say we are even appalled at Chinese relationship, very close relationship with a country which is recognized the world over as the greatest state sponsor of terrorism. We are also really surprised at your, shall I say, patronage of a group which is recognized again the world over as a terrorist group. How do you reconcile this with your observation and your very erudite presentation when you said that China is opposed to terror in all its forms, in all its manifestations? Thank you, sir.
喂，非常感谢这位朋友的提问，你是提了一个确实非常好的问题，这也充分说明了这个中印两国，这个无论是在哪个方面，包括反恐方面，充分沟通的这种必要性。其实我知道你提的问题是什么，你和我都很清楚。在这个问题上，它的核心其实不是中国的问题，在这个问题核心是印度和巴基斯坦的问题。在你提出的这个列明的问题上，中国的观点，我不知道你清楚不清楚。我觉得印度的外交部和印度外交部的发言人比我们都清楚。中国其实一直是在努力和印度和巴基斯坦合作，能顺利的、合法的、合理的又合乎程序的来顺利的解决这么一个问题。至于报纸上怎么说，学者怎么说，另外一回事情。但是我相信印度外交部和他们的发言人会比我们更清楚。至于你说的中国和另外一个国家的关系，我也非常明白，你所指的是什么。但是这就是我这次到印度来和印度朋友加强沟通的一个重要的方面。中印两国实际上，你的提问本身，我有一个很大的感觉，就是你对中国是缺乏了解的，你对中国的外交，我相信也是缺乏了解的。为什么？我跟你说，我相信我对印度的了解也比你强不哪去。为什么呢？我们两个国家25亿人口，你知道去年中印两国人口交往是多少吗？中国到印度80万，印度到中国才20万人。这是非常少的，非常可怜的，和我们25亿人口相比。我这2天和印度的很多政党的朋友在一起交流，我就跟他们说，我说我们两个国家的交流不光是政党交流，人民之间的交流也很重要。我昨天下午和印人党的总书记，也就是基金会的这个高级的理事马达夫先生 在一起会见，他就告诉我，他说他特别想到中国再去一去，他2年没去了，他觉得他对中国了解的非常少。我就跟他举一个例子，我说你看，中国和印度我们2个国家研究美国的有多少人，那么研究各自的又有多少人？我们有一大批的专家学者在研究美国，印度也一样，但是中国研究印度的人和印度研究中国的人非常少，这就是我们缺少相互理解，它会带来很多误解。所以我相信以后随着我们2个国家经常的交流，我们会有更多的机会增进了解。至于说中国和巴基斯坦的关系，我觉得在中国的这个中国普通民众的脑子里，中国和巴基斯坦和印度都是很好的关系，或者说都应该是很好的关系。这就是我的答案。
Thank you. Minister Karzai, go ahead. I'll come back.
Thank you so much. There was a comment that our German colleague.
Sorry? Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. There was a comment that our German colleague raised about Mr. Hikmatyar, Mr. Kessling, and he looked at it whether it was realpolitik or moving in identifying him as terrorist. You know, what makes a terrorist? When individuals continue to attack civilians for a political purpose, in the nutshell, in the most simplest of definitions, that's what you end up becoming a terrorist. But at the same time, I think it's the government's responsibilities when they talk to these individuals and to have a strategic strategy that you cannot kill every person that is involved in violence. As I mentioned yesterday, there needs to be a strategic component to it. I personally was involved in those discussions that took place with Hizb Islami. And there were a couple of red lines and there were a couple of conditions that we had set forth. The first one was that Hizb Islami, and particularly Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, needed to accept the Afghan constitution. And in the document that was signed with Mr. Hikmatyar, that is one of the conditions that he accepted. Second, it was also stressed that he needs to break ties with international terrorist organizations and renounce violence. And he has been able to do that. One of the key reasons why he was removed from the UN sanctions list, because he particularly, and this was also the condition of the United States and many other countries, that unless he officially and publicly says that he is not going to have any contacts with the international terrorist organizations, they're not going to delist him. So he was able to do that, and eventually he was delisted. In addition, there's also international support from China, from Russia, and from many other countries that are part of the Security Council supporting this process to move forward. It was an intra-Afghan dialogue that I think led to a success. I think we want to replicate that. It was a great lesson for us, and we want to see how we can take that example and start adapting it to the Taliban and various other groups. But at the same time, there were red lines from the government that were met. And it was in that context that we were able to proceed. History, in my opinion, is full of examples of individuals being involved in certain activities and then eventually they become part of a political process. I think if you look at, for example, Menachem Begin, in his earliest days, you know, he was involved in various gangs. Eventually he became the 6th Prime Minister of Israel. If you look at Yasser Arafat, if you also look at, for example, Nelson Mandela to a certain extent. I mean, there have been evolutions of certain individuals. I'm not, categorizing Mr. Hikmatyar in that list at all. That's not my intentions. But at the same time, I think we need to at least give individuals certain, opportunities where they say that they're not going to be involved in certain activities. And for a political process, have them engaged in order to move forward towards a more strategic environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your intervention. General P.K. Singh, sir.
Hello. Yeah, that's better. Thank you, Admiral Sinha. Firstly, I must compliment the India Foundation and the panelists over here. My question is addressed both to Mr. Yuan and Mr. Kiesling. 2 points I want to flag. Mr. Kiesling brought out that there are 15,000 Chinese and 70,000 Pakistanis guarding the China-Pakistan economic corridor to keep it safe, to keep it open. My question is, they're guarding this CPEC from whom? Where is the threat coming from? The threat is internal. So, what is the comment of the Chinese friend to this? Secondly, will this threat not grow when you have more Chinese coming in there, coming in into the ACZ, making your colonies, making your industries, setting up industries? The threat will only grow. When there's nothing, you require 85,000 people. When more of you come there, there will be problem. So what is your answer to that? What is the threat against which you need so many people? The second question is, I think the Chinese know it and the Pakistanis know it, that the loan that you're giving in this big project of 56 billion project, less than 1 billion is an aid. Rest of it is all repayable loan. And I'm sure you know the Pakistanis can't pay it. So what is it that will happen when they are unable to repay this? I think as far as Gwadar is concerned, it's already, the Pakistanis have lost sovereignty over it. Will they lose more sovereignty at other parts where you set up? Or what is the trade-off? Or what is it that you will take in lieu of the default? Thank you.
I know some part of question might just get out of the ambit of this subject that we were discussing, but I'll request Mr. Ziving to address whatever questions you can. The first part of it.
Coming to the end of your question or comments, you said Pakistan has lost already sovereignty on Port of Gwadar. Well, I wouldn't say no. I pointed out that when the submarine incident happened, China reacted by giving 2 ships, and 2 other ships are coming in the near future, for joint security on the corridor coast. Yes, to some extent, Pakistan might, I say it very carefully, might lose some sovereignty on Gwadar. Your comment on the 17,000 and 15,000, well, there are threats in terrorist threats in Pakistan. Pakistan is suffering herself. I was under the impression when I prepared my presentation here that the conference was focused more on the Indian Ocean region. If I would have given a topic on terrorism in Pakistan itself, which was not given to me, then I could have explained in detail what has happened in Karachi, what has happened in Rawalpindi even, when the GHQ and when the ISI was attacked. I could also mention what has happened in Peshawar, but that was, at least I had the impression, not the topic of this conference. That's why I also focused a little bit on the Indian Ocean. Well, there are terrorists, but I mean, you cannot stop economic development, and the Belt project will bring economic development, and that they have here known these measures as having special troops to protect their workers and their investment and so on. I see that's natural and that is welcomed. That's what I would like to say.
Mr. Ziving, you would like to make some comment? Yeah.
非常感谢这位朋友的提问。在中国网络上现在流行一个词叫"躺枪"，意思就是这事本来和你没有关系，你正好在这里，突然那枪的榴弹就打到你了。所以我今天到这里感觉就是一种躺枪的感觉，因为这个南亚的恐怖主义也好，印度洋的恐怖主义也好，除了是我们要共同合作反恐之外，和中国本身确实关系没那么大。 但是今天不光我躺枪，包括中国和巴基斯坦的这个经济走廊，包括我们的一带一路都躺枪了。所以我非常感谢你这个提问，正好给我一个机会，让我来就这个问题讲讲我自己的看法。我相信“一带一路”这个倡议提出来到今天已经3年了。3年来，我相信“一带一路”已经成为国际社会上一个很热的词汇，大家对它都有了解。而且我相信大家也看到了“一带一路”这3年来在国际社会受欢迎的程度和越来越多的国家来积极参与的程度。就我现在的了解，现在已经有30多个国家和中国签署了“一带一路”的政府间的合作协议，有100个左右的国家和地区已经表示我们肯定会积极参与这些项目。而且应该说3年多以来，这个“一带一路”建设已经取得了一些初步的成果。所以说，我们现在可以说“一带一路”是目前为止中国提供给世界的一个应该说最受欢迎的一个公共产品和一个友好合作、共同发展的平台。我希望大家知道，中国我们的发展现在有2点，我希望给大家强调一下。第一点，就中国现在的发展，我们有一个重要的理念，就是中国的发展绝对不能建立在四邻结弱的基础上，就是说中国的发展一定要往我们的邻居们都变得越来越稳定、越来越强大。我们的邻居如果很弱小，经济发展很差，中国的经济发展就不会好到哪里去，就不会有一个稳定的预期。所以中国是最希望我们周边的邻居、周边所有国家都保持长期的稳定，而且经济向好的。第二，中国现在的发展非常重视共建、共商、共享，这3个点是一带一路最核心的理念。我们整个在和相关的很多国家这个谈到一带一路项目推进的时候，都坚持这个原则。实际上大家能看到，现在的一带一路项目不光是我们沿线的，像中国周边的这些国家，而且你像到欧洲、到英国那么远，到拉美，还有到非洲，都有很多国家要加入一带一路的这个项目。拉美很多国家说，你把一带一路延长线，拉美可以在延长线上。所以应该说，这是一个在经济全球化发展到今天，在世界经济面临的更复杂的局势下，那中国给世界的一个非常好的公共产品。这是关于一带一路。所以在一带一路推进的过程中，我相信在每个国家恐怕多多少少都是一些问题。但是说到一带一路，中国是不是一个战略？中国人认为一带一路只是一个倡议，他所谓的战略很多的是别的国家的人赋予我们的，赋予这个倡议本身的。最近好多朋友，包括刚才我听到几位发言人和朋友的提问，你们谈到的珍珠链，你们谈到的中国从瓜达尔有出海口，中国从缅甸有出海口，这个东西实事求是讲，在中国大家并不熟悉这些概念，反倒是很多外国朋友比我们还要熟悉这些概念。这些概念本身应该是很多外国的所谓的战略家、学者赋予我们的。中国更注重的是和周边的国家共同发展。刚才这位德国朋友，这个德国专家提到的中国在几个国家的项目：斯里兰卡、巴基斯坦、孟加拉国、缅甸。我最近半年以内这几个国家都去过，我也了解这几个国家中国项目所谓的面临的一些情况。这里面有一个共同的现象，就是例如说吧，基本上我们感觉就是有的时候这些项目它会成为这些国家内部政治斗争的一个工具，这是有一点是可能的。所以呢，我们看到有些媒体在吵，有些民众在闹，但是它背后都有一些政客在推动。 我相信这些东西大家其实应该比我们还清楚。里边有一个很重要的现象，这几个国家都有执政党和反对党。当你成为执政党的时候，都特别支持这个项目，为什么呢？因为这个项目能推动你国家发展。当你不执政了，这个项目你就是个反对党的时候，他就会去反对这个项目，这是比较普遍的一个现象。所以大家应该能看清楚这一点。在这个中国在和相关国家推动这些经济合作项目的时候，确实面临一些问题，但是很多问题来自于这些国家的体制。至于说的中巴经济走廊，中国和巴基斯坦的关系，我刚才说，我们非常愿意和巴基斯坦，也非常愿意和印度开展“一带一路”合作。我相信印度的很多朋友们都知道“一带一路”，但是印度我们也感觉到，印度国内民间也好，政府也好，不同的政党、地方和中央对“一带一路”的看法和态度是有落差的，是不一样的。我们非常希望和印度也开展更多的一带一路项目，别说460亿、560亿、760亿，我们都愿意，就看印度是不是我们能一起合作。中巴经济走廊，至于说的殖民地，这一点是没有的。至于说到中国有1万多人在巴基斯坦这个保卫自己的工人，那没有的。中国在外面是没有军队的，这是肯定没有的。巴基斯坦我2个月之前刚去过，中巴经济走廊建设确实规模比较大，确实项目比较多，而且确实也有一些先期的成果。到现在为止，确实有一些重要的成果了。但是有一条，我希望大家知道，中国和巴基斯坦开展经贸合作，没有任何别的战略企图。更重要的是，如果说到反恐和今天的反恐要联系到一起的话，那么我觉得中巴经济走廊建设如果取得一些成就，让巴基斯坦的经济社会能有更好的发展，这个国家更稳定，我就相信肯定有助于消除南亚恐怖主义的根源。谢谢。
Thank you. Yeah, you had a question. Yeah, we'll take 3 questions. Yeah, go ahead, ma'am. Please take the mic.
Thank you, sir. I'm Ayushi Ketkar, and I'm representing an organization called Seva International. My question is to the Chinese delegate. On this very platform, needless to say, India and China are the 2 most dominant countries in this region, impacting the security of this region. On this very platform, we've seen both the delegates, one talk of terrorism being used as a strategic tool, and the other speaking of counterterrorism as a strategic tool. With this kind of differences, what is the hope and scope for consensus on a very important issue of tackling terrorism?
Okay. Yeah, please. The gentleman at the back, can you give the mic there?
Yeah, my question is to Ambassador Kaju. Why not to come some countries together as we have groups against like NATO and all? So why not to come together against Pakistan the way China is supporting them? The other countries are not supporting this type of issue. So that means they have interest to encourage it. Otherwise Pakistan can't have its own. The way we have global groups against war, so this way counter-terrorism can be held by grouping. Thank you.
One more question, yeah. Yes, ma'am, yourself.
My question also goes to Ambassador Kaju about his views on the suggestion made by Mehbooba Mufti in the morning session, the Chief Minister of J&K, about India joining this CPEC, and also about the banking system. Isn't that a sort of dual currency which was suggested by them in earlier avatar?
Okay, I'll take last question. One question here, ma'am, yourself. Yeah.
My question is for Mr. Kaju. I'm Amreen Aga from Indian Council of World Affairs, And sir, I've seen a departure in your argument. Like earlier, you always talked about not closing the channels of negotiation. And today you said engagement is pandering to the Pakistanis. So I would like to know why this departure in your stand on Pakistan's dealing with Pakistan. And secondly, do you think relying on militaristic approach towards Pakistan will yield the desired results? Or is it counterproductive to the larger issue of building peace? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sir, I request Ambassador Kaju, followed by Zibing and our German speaker.
I'm not hopeful of an international platform being built on counter-terrorism against on the counter-terrorism issue vis-a-vis Pakistan. I think Pakistan's location, its size, and its importance, objective importance, warrants many countries to have deep interests in Pakistan, and these interests are enhanced because of the negative policies that Pakistan has pursued. That's ironical, but to my mind, it's true. Therefore, while all countries will pay lip service on Pakistan, promotion of terrorism, yet they will limit themselves when it comes to concrete action. That is why I've often felt that India has to really fashion policies on Pakistani terror by itself. While trying to build a consensus, there's nothing wrong in that, but the chances of success of that consensus, to my mind, are limited. Second, I'm not against engagement with Pakistan, but engagement with Pakistan cannot be an end in itself for India. I mean, the idea, the notion that talks by itself will yield some miraculous result with Pakistan I think is wrong. And there is the evidence of the last 70 years to back that feeling that I have, or that conviction that I have. I think there was a third question on Pakistan. But that, pardon? I wasn't here in the morning session, so unfortunately I missed what the J&K Chief Minister said. But I, for one, feel that whatever our Chinese friends may say on the CPEC, I doubt very much if the Pakistanis will allow us access to the CPEC. The CPEC is for Pakistan not only an economic project, it's also a strategic project. Whatever our Chinese friends may say, the fact is that it has a strategic component. And to deny that component, to my mind, is not realistic. Therefore, I think it is a question which simply doesn't arise when it comes to our joining CPEC. But there is one comment that I would like to make on the philosophical argument that was put forward by His Excellency the Minister from Afghanistan, and which is this. If terrorism is a crime, then does a political process simply wash away crime? I think that is a question which the international community must answer. Here are terrorists like Mr. Hikmatyar, who have been the reason for the killings of thousands of people. Now, there are examples in history. Yes, Menachem Begin, etc. There are these examples. On Nelson Mandela, I'm not quite sure, but Nelson Mandela was involved in a struggle for liberation against apartheid. We can debate whether violence should be a tool for such struggles. That's a separate issue. But for people like Mr. Hikmatyar, who have, as I said, been the reason for thousands and thousands of deaths, should that be simply forgiven or forgotten? Doesn't justice demand that they be held accountable? And we know that there were leaders in this after the Second World War who were called to account and who were executed after a judicial process. I think that is an issue that must be confronted. It simply cannot be a matter of political convenience. That is a point which I think we all need to deliberate. Thank you.
Mr. Zibing, would you like to address that first question? Terrorism versus counter-terrorism that you suggested.
非常感谢刚才这位女士的提问。其实对待反恐怖主义的态度，我刚才已经在讲话中讲了。我愿意很简要的再回答一下，一共3个态度。第一，对恐怖主义应该是坚决反对的，无论哪一种形式的恐怖主义。第二，对恐怖主义应该是注意铲除它的根源，而不仅仅是表面上解决它的问题，也就是说，要解决它的经济社会发展的根源，解决它的宗教和民族问题的根源。第3个点就是一定要加强国际的恐怖合作。我们今天来这里出席这个会议，大家有一个共同的目的。如果说大家还有分歧的话，但是在加强恐怖主义的反恐的国际合作方面，这是我们今天所有参会人员的一个共同的基础。所以一定要加强国际反恐合作，各种层面、各种形式的国际反恐合作。谢谢。
Yeah, I would like to make 2 short comments. First, once again, Hekmat, I understand and I know everything what you said and your arguments, but to my understanding, the Hekmat case right now proves that neither the UN nor Washington nor all the other ones, including Pakistan's other players, know a way out of the Afghanistan dilemma right now. Whether it will be helpful to bring that man in, please remember, he was the one who cannoned Kabul. Not the Soviets have done that, by the way. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, terrorism in Pakistan, my mind, and I mentioned it in my presentation, one of the key points still is the Kashmir issue. If the Kashmir issue, and the Honorable the Chief Minister of Kashmir this morning, Mrs. Mufti said, that it is possible to have a period of some sort of peace. And if the Kashmir issue is put on ice by the Pakistani side, I say the Pakistani side, on ice, and I hope that the Chinese will push them into that direction, then terrorism will, to a large extent, already be wiped out, to a large extent. And Balochistan will be peace. Then the reality, and I always try to stick to reality, the reality is, although the Indian side is active, I listened once to one Indian intelligence man saying to the other one, if it is necessary, we can let Pakistan bleed much. If not necessary, if the situation improves, we can let them bleed less. And that is again the name of the game, as I said. So the main issue in my mind is Kashmir. To put it on ice, the Pakistanis will not give up their demand for a long, long time. But to put it on ice, which was recommended by a Chinese president some 25 years ago already, and the Pakistanis were speechless when he said it to them. When the Kashmir issue is solved, then you have more peace also in Balochistan. And Afghanistan is a special problem. The solution will be in the hands of the next leaders and generations. Thank you.
So we had very serious discourse on this very important matter of the terrorism in South Asia, because very often it is said that it is a nuclear flashpoint as far as South Asia is concerned. And we heard some very 3 deliberations and discourse. There are a lot of common threads, and some threads are not very common. So I think India Foundation will probably dig out these elements and possibly have some more discussion. So I must say that our panelists have done a very fantastic job, and all that remains for me to give them a round of applause. And thank you for your patience and attention.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot to our panel for their wonderful insights and taking on very difficult questions. We will now request the chair to give mementos to our distinguished speakers. But before that, a couple of announcements. One, the lunch after this, we break for lunch after this session. Lunch will be served on both the left and the right side of the hall. So please feel free to go wherever you want. Secondly, the book released by the Honorable Vice President yesterday, Global Terrorism, is available for sale outside the ballroom for rupees 500 against a list price of rupees 750. So make sure you grab a copy. I now request the chair to please give a token of our appreciation to Ambassador Kaju. Next, I request the chair to please give a token of our appreciation to Mr. Yuan Zibing from China. Finally, I request the chair to present a token of our appreciation to Mr. Hein Keisling from Germany. Thank you. We break for lunch now and reconvene at 2 p.m. for plenary 2 on terrorism in Africa. Thank you.